All right, welcome everybody. We are just going to give this a couple minutes while people filter into the stream. Okay, for those of you who are just showing up now, we're going to give it a couple more minutes and let everyone filter in, and then we'll get started. Those of you just joining us, don't forget we do have a chat function here on the side of your screen. So throughout the show, as questions come up, go ahead and add them in.
Scanner complete.
Mission completed.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. So we apologize for the delay. I'm getting a notice that our super high. So I'm going to pause real quick. Everyone just hang tight. I want to fix this just to make sure that everyone can see. All right, ladies and gentlemen, sorry for that brief delay. We were having a problem with connection. We are out here in the middle of the ocean, full disclosure, so sometimes that happens. Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Where the Babies Roam, a shark tagging adventure. I'm Kylie Vandy Wingard, your moderator today, and we have an exciting adventure lined up for you all. Get ready to dive into the world of ocean giants because today we're going on an epic journey to meet some very cool top ocean predators. We're here off of Carpinteria, like I said, sort of off the coast in the middle of the ocean, at one of the few sites where the babies roam, which is to say one of the few juvenile white shark nurseries off the coast of California. Great white sharks from ages 0 to 6-year-old socialize, they hunt, and they grow out here, and they are some of the most amazing predators in the ocean. What is super amazing is that we will be joined shortly by our host, Dr. Gwen Goodmanlowe, and our resident white shark researcher, Dr. Chris Lowe from CSU Long Beach's Shark Lab. These guys are out in the water right now looking for sharks to study, and together we will learn more about their anatomy, their biology, and their role in the ocean ecosystem. Like I mentioned before, we will answer your questions throughout this, so please throw them in the chat function. We'll show you some cool behind-the-scenes action and get up and close and personal with some of the ocean's most misunderstood and magnificent creatures. All right, I am going to turn things over to Dr.
Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Gwen Goodmanlowe, and I am actually a marine mammologist, but today we're going to be looking at white sharks and talking about white sharks. So we're going to be talking to the resident shark expert, Dr. Chris Lowe from Cal State Long Beach. He's the director of the Shark Lab there. Before we get started, I want to introduce the crew on the boat. So we're going to start with our boat driver, Zach Merson. We also have our drone pilot, Anthony McGinnis. We have our NOAA ambassador, and his name is Leonardo Lynn, and he's from Crean Lutheran High School. And last but not least, we have our camera woman extraordinaire, Ava Dominicelli. All right, let's get started. So, Chris, I have heard that this is considered to be the nursery ground for baby white sharks. So can you tell us, first of all, what is the difference between a white shark and a great white shark before we even get started?
Sure. So that's a common nomenclature, right? So it's a name. The common name in the old days was great white shark, and that was because we thought, that there might have been multiple species. Now we know there's only one species globally, and because they're not that great, we just refer to them as white sharks. Actually, I'm not kidding; they are really cool, but we just refer to them as white sharks. So white sharks and great white sharks are one and the same.
Okay, great. Good to know. So what is a nursery ground, and why is this a nursery ground for white sharks?
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. So there are a lot of shark species that actually use nurseries, which means the babies hang out there. They're either born there or they go there and hang out and use it literally as a nursery. It is a safe place for them. It's a place usually where the water is warmer and there's an abundant food source. Because all sharks get no parental care. They're born, they're completely on their own. So by being in a shallow environment like these beaches here, that is a safe place for them. In addition, the water is warmer closer to the shoreline than it is further offshore. And because they have to learn how to feed on their own, there's an abundant food source here, like stingrays and a lot of other species on the seafloor that are easy targets for them.
Okay, so you said that it gives them protection from predators, but what predators do great white sharks have here, or white sharks have in Southern California?
Yeah, so adult white sharks will eat them. Adult mako sharks will also eat the babies. So again, they don't know what a predator is after birth, and that's one of the things we think drives them to these beaches. So they're moving away from those habitats where the adults are, and by being in shallow water, those bigger predators can't get in there. So it's rare to see mako sharks in close to shore, even adult white sharks. But the other predators are things like orcas that will also eat white sharks.
All right. So let's go back to something Kylie said. So Kylie said that this is a nursery area for white sharks that are from 0 to 6 years old. So 0. So to me, that means newborn. So are they actually born here? Do the moms give birth here in this nursery ground?
So we don't actually think birthing is occurring here.
Okay.
We think it's occurring offshore, maybe in deeper water. But because of that fear, that drives them in close to the beach. And the shallower the water, the safer. So we know that the young ones, the youngest ones, and we start seeing them around as early as April. through the summer will hang out. They'll pick a beach and they'll hang out at that beach day in, day out for weeks to months at a time. And then if it gets too cold, interestingly, they migrate south to Baja, where the winter temperatures are as warm as our summer temperatures. And that way, the next spring, many of them come back to Southern California and go back to the same nursery hotspot that they were at before.
Okay, so before I ask you how you know how old a shark is, so we'll get back to that. What I want to know is, I mean, this is a truly lovely beach, I would have to say, but we have truly lovely beaches from here all the way down to Mexico. So why here? Why not in Long Beach? Why not in Newport Beach? Why not in Newport Back Bay? Why not in San Diego? What is it about this particular beach that makes it special for them to be a nursery?
Actually, that's something we're still trying to figure out. So one of the things we know, as you pointed out, is that the habitat is kind of the same, but sharks are picking certain places, and they're there literally. That aggregation might be there for years, and then suddenly the aggregation will break down, and then we'll see sharks going to another new beach. We think that food regulates that. We think they actually start to eat down the food. So our boat operator, Zach, that was one of the things he did for his master's thesis. And one of his key findings was at places where we find these aggregations of white sharks, we find fewer stingrays and small sharks, which we think constitute a bulk of their diet.
Okay. So, all right, stingrays and small sharks. So what kind of small sharks might these juveniles be eating or babies be eating?
So based on some of the diet data, we think they're eating leopard sharks, smooth hounds, bat rays, round stingrays, we call pancake rays because they're round like a pancake. And then they're eating a lot of fish on the bottom. So they're eating halibuts, they're eating flatfish, they're eating surf perch, they're eating croakers. All the things on the seafloor are fair game for them. And they're relatively easy targets. But more importantly, these areas, these coastal areas, are hugely productive. There are lots of these fish there.
Okay. So, all right, stingrays. I know when I want to go swimming off Southern California, I have to do something known as the stingray shuffle, because stingrays have a venomous barb that, really painful when it hits your, any part of your body. So I don't get it. Like, they're still eating them. So what happens to that barb? Don't they get hurt? Don't they get the venom in them? Like, why are they still eating them when that thing is so, so painful?
Yeah, so they do get stung. In fact, we've found stingray barbs embedded into their jaws, in their mouth. We've seen them actually in the ones we've done necropsies on, in their livers, in their stomachs.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, they have pretty hardy immune systems, so they can deal with those sorts of things. We don't really understand how the venom works in a colder bodied animal.
Okay.
In mammals and in us, that hurts a lot.
Right.
And I think a lot of that has to do with our metabolism and how that venom has evolved. But in sharks, we don't know how effective that venom is.
Okay, so that leads me to my next question, and that is, do sharks feel pain? Well, maybe they don't feel pain. How do we know if they feel pain?
Sharks do feel pain.
Okay.
It's probably a little different than the pain that we experience, but because their metabolisms are lower, but they do feel pain. We do see them react, and they should. All animals should react to something that is traumatic to avoid them from getting hurt. But with that said, they also are very rough and tumble animals, especially during mating.
Okay.
So males have to bite females in order to mate with them. So there's a lot of that going on. So we think that their pain reception is probably a little different than that of ours.
Okay. So why do they have to bite? Why do males have to bite females to mate?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So sharks are one of those few groups of animals that have internal fertilization.
Okay.
So in order to do that, males bite females in their pectoral fin in order to get them into a position where they can insert one of their claspers into the female's cloaca, and then they pump sperm into the female.
Okay.
So it's actually an internal form of fertilization. And then the females can actually store sperm for more than a year.
Wow.
Which means they can bypass mating for the next year.
Wow.
And because they get so chewed up, that gives them time to heal.
Okay.
The other really cool thing is, and you'll love this, female skin is 2 to 3 times thicker than males.
Wow, really?
Yeah, so we always know women have thicker skin.
Yeah, of course we do.
Exactly.
All right, so that leads me to 2 questions. One is, how do you tell the difference between a male and a female shark?
Great question. So males on their pelvic fins have 2 projections called claspers. And they project out from the pelvic fin, and they're used as intromittent organs. In other words, that's what they insert in the female's cloaca to pump sperm into the female. That's how internal fertilization occurs. Females do not have that. Now, the really cool thing about sharks, and remember, sharks just another fish, they develop those early in development. So even embryonic sharks start to develop claspers when they're met.
Oh, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. Okay, so all right, I have so many questions. So the next one then is, if the male is biting the female, what is a shark's skin like, and how much does that damage it when a male is biting the female? Like, what does it do to the shark skin?
Yeah, so obviously shark skin is different from other fish. They have scales, but their scales are totally different. Their teeth, they're actually extensions of their jaw. So these teeth are just like you would think. They're a bunch of teeth overlaid like shingles in a house. And if you pet them one way, they're very smooth. But if you pet them the other way, you get the jagged edge of the tooth. So first of all, that tooth is the same as ours. It has dentine. It's very hard, and it acts as armor. The other thing is, because of that shape, it is very hydrodynamic. It creates these micro turbulence that makes the animal move through the water more efficiently. So that characteristic makes them very strong and resistant to tear, but it also makes them very hydrodynamic in the water.
So if the male bites the female and she might lose some of those dormal denticles, then what happens?
So they heal very quickly,
Okay.
and they do have some pretty impressive healing capabilities, but they can replace those teeth just
okay.
like they do the teeth in their jaws.
That was going to be my next question. So you said the shark teeth are really hard, but then why is it that, when you see a shark jaw, somewhere, you go to a curio shop and you see a shark jaw, or you see it, on the internet, why do they have all those rows and rows of teeth? How does that work?
So shark's entire skeleton is made out of cartilage, the same stuff in our ears and our nose, which is relatively flexible. And even their jaw is made out of cartilage. So their teeth, anytime they bite into something hard, the teeth can fall out. So as a result, they're constantly producing new teeth behind the gum line, and those rotate forward like a conveyor belt. About every 30 days, the front row of teeth just fall out. The cool thing about that is that enables sharks to change their tooth morphology as they grow and produce bigger teeth as they grow.
Interesting.
So that enables them to eat different things.
Okay, so that leads me to my next question, which is, if you look at a shark jaw and you don't know anything about the shark, can you tell the species of shark by their teeth?
Actually, I'm going to ask you that question. So yes, you can. So the morphology of the tooth and the number of teeth in the jaw and the shape and size of those tell us something about the species. And because you went through and identified how many?
A lot. 6,000?
Yeah, over 6,000 jaws. And how many different species did you identify?
Oh, I think there were 25.
Yeah. So obviously those differences are specific to a certain species, and they help us identify them. But quite often, some of the tooth morphologies are so similar, it's kind of hard to tell them apart, right?
And different species have different shapes of teeth in their jaw, and as they age, the teeth change too, so it's very difficult.
Exactly. Okay. But a lot of that correlates with what they eat.
Yeah.
Right. So some of the sharks have very, very small teeth. They're eating very fine things like squid that have very soft bodies. Some of them might be eating worms and things like that. So they even have some crushing teeth, or clams. So they have crushing type plates.
And what about whale sharks? What kind of teeth do they have?
They have because they have to mate, right? So they have very fine teeth to grab the female, but they're eating plankton and fish eggs. So not a whole lot of chewing going on there, but mainly for grasping the female.
Okay. All right. So let's get to the nitty gritty here. So what are you doing here? Like, how do you study sharks? What's the technology you use? Because I know you're a techno geek. So tell me about the technology a little bit.
Exactly. So in the early days, it was hard to study sharks, right? You couldn't stay underwater very long. The bubbles from scuba would scare them, things like that. You could only see them during the day. Okay. But now with technology, we have all this cool technology. We're able to do things that we could never do before. So one of the technologies we use is called acoustic telemetry. So this is an acoustic transmitter. This produces a sound that is higher than the sharks can hear, and sound travels really well through seawater. So this tag gets jabbed into the shark, kind of off like a piercing, hangs off the shark, and it's constantly putting out this ultrasonic ping. When the shark gets within 300 yards or so of an underwater receiver, the receiver will log the time, the date, and the ID number.
Okay, so what kind of tag is this called?
So this is an acoustic transmitter, but it's a special type.
Okay.
So on the end here, this also has an accelerometer, so it can measure activity, and it also has a depth sensor, so it measures the shark's depth. So with this tag, not only do we get a detection, the receiver says the shark is somewhere within this 300-yard radius of the receiver, but it gives us how active the shark was, fast, medium, slow, or the depth that the shark is at.
Okay.
So we get an alternation of that information, and that gives us a lot more data about what that shark is doing while it's here in the nursery.
Okay, but it doesn't give you temperature. So how do you know if the shark is, say, following the thermocline up and down, staying in the warm water, going to the cool water during the day and things like that. So how do you measure that?
That's a good question. So our acoustic receivers, which are all on the seafloor in a grid, have temperature sensors on them, and they're constantly recording seafloor temperature.
Got it.
And then we have buoys at the surface that have temperature data loggers at the surface as well.
Okay.
So what we found is that sharks are actually using the upper layer, which is the warmer layer. During the day, they're warming up. And then when they want to feed, they're feeding on the bottom, which is the cooler water. That's where their food is. But they're not spending as much time in cool water.
Okay.
And that's because their metabolism is faster in warm water, and they can grow faster.
Interesting. So how fast do sharks grow each year, these baby sharks in particular?
So we've learned that they grow about a foot a year for their first 6 years, at least.
And so all right, so back to the technology for a second, because I lost my train of thought. So all right, so that's one type of tag that you use, but I know you use other types of tags. So can you tell me about the other types of tags?
So the way we find sharks, in fact, right now, Anthony's up in the air trying to look for a shark. And the way we find them is using drones. And drones have really revolutionized how we study sharks. They're a great science tool. They have really good camera on them, and they give us really good data. So what happens is when we see a shark from the air, from the drone, we can drop that drone down. That enables us to move up and know where the shark is, because we can't see it from the boat. Once we get close enough to see it, the first thing we have to do is determine whether it's a male or a female. And to do that, we have a GoPro on a pole that we dip in the water. To give you an example, Kylie's going to show you some footage of what a dip cam looks like. So we're bringing in the drone now. So we're going to do a rebattery. So now you can see the drone coming in, and Zach's going to catch it for Anthony. So again, this is one of our best tools to use, not only just for locating sharks, but we can also use this tool to figure out what sharks do around people. So it enables us to kind of study sharks even when they're just cruising around the beach. Here coming in. Anthony's a good pilot. Takes a minute for the drone to shut down, and then eventually it turns off and change batteries. So once we've found the shark and we've got the dip cam data, it tells us whether it's a male or a female, the next step is to put a dart tag in it. So to show you what that looks like, Kylie's going to show you another film reel showing us tagging a shark from a boat.
Okay, I have a question.
Yep.
So, all right. So, how do you know if you've tagged the shark already? Because once you've tagged it once, you don't want to have another tag in it, right?
Yeah, great question. Okay. So that's where the drone technology really helps, right? Because we can see the tag from the air. So we know whether it's tagged or not. And because we try to get the tag right next to the dorsal fin, we quite often put them in different positions. So we can kind of tell individuals apart based on where the tag is located.
Okay. So you put it next to the dorsal fin. Like I know from mammalogists, we usually tag them on their flippers. So why not like on their caudal fin or like on their pectoral fin, or why isn't it on the fin itself?
So sometimes we do have tags that we do put on the fins, but these tags we want to be out for years. Okay. So that tag that I just showed you will be on the shark for 3 years. Okay. So the idea is if we put it in the back next to the dorsal fin, that's the most hydrodynamic place to put the tag. So it creates the least amount of drag. So we like to put the tags there, they ride better there, and then helps keep them in longer. Okay.
So now I know you have other types of technology. So isn't there a tag that you put on the dorsal fin itself? What kind of tag is that?
Yeah, so we do have tags we put on the dorsal fins. Some of them clamp on the dorsal fins, and they're called satellite tags. So this is a powerful radio transmitter. When the fin breaks the surface, it's transmitting to satellites in orbit using radio signals which cannot pass through seawater. So, but the minute that tag goes underwater, it turns off. So when that tag is up, I'll actually get a text alert from the satellite service saying there was a detection at this time, date, latitude, and longitude with the ID. But because sharks don't have to come to the surface to breathe, we use another type of satellite tag called pop-off satellite tags. These get darted into the shark's back. They have a temperature, light, and depth sensor on them and a little computer that's logging that data and then at a pre-described time and date, that pops off the shark, floats up to the surface, uploads all that data satellite, and then downloads it to me in my office.
Wow, that is really kind of lazy biology.
It is, and it's super expensive. So those satellite tags are $5,000, and it's the most
Wow.
expensive cell service you can imagine.
Wow.
Every time it transmits, it's like $5.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what about, don't you also kind of do surgeries on sharks and implant transmitters into their bodies? So how does that work?
So if we can catch the shark, we can flip it upside down. And if you invert a shark and you put it upside down, we can put it into what's called tonic immobility. The shark goes to sleep. And we can surgically implant a transmitter into its body cavity. Those transmitters are a little bit bigger and about the size of a lighter.
Okay.
And then those will last 10 years.
Wow, that's amazing.
So we can suture that up. And when you flip those sharks back over, it's like throwing a switch. They wake up and swim away.
So no anesthesia, no lidocaine, no nothing. They don't really feel the pain even though you're cutting into them?
They probably feel a little bit of pain,
Uh-huh.
but because they're inverted,
Okay.
their vagus nerve,
Uh-huh.
everything is slowed down.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And is it true that sharks can get water like into their body cavity?
Yeah, so that's the
How does
amazing
that
thing.
work?
So when we do surgeries, our concerns are always infection, right? So for any other animal, if you do this to a mammal and you get any water or even dirt inside a wound,
Yeah.
that can cause horrible infection. But sharks actually have water in their body cavity. They have two pores down by their pelvic fins
Whoa.
that allow seawater to come into their body cavity.
That's crazy. But there's bacteria and viruses in the seawater, and that doesn't affect them?
Apparently not. And they have really amazing immune systems.
Okay.
They're very primitive, but they're very advanced in many ways. In fact, they're biologists learning a lot about sharks' immune systems, and they even have biotic properties in the mucus of their skin.
Wow.
So when they get a wound, that quickly floods in the wound, and it appears to be really effective at killing bacteria and viruses.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so back to the nursery ground for a second. So, all right, if this is a great nursery ground for white sharks, what about other species of sharks? We have lots of species of sharks here in Southern California. So are these little baby sharks of different species mingling here? That
They
would
are.
be cool.
Yeah, they are,
Okay.
and there are other nurseries. So we have a lot of other species that use these habitats, and we think some of the bigger ones, the 6-year-olds, which are up around 9 feet long, are feeding on many of those other species.
Okay.
So they're eating leopard sharks, they're eating gray smoothhounds, they're
Okay.
eating bigger bat
Uh-huh.
rays. They're big enough that they can eat some of the bigger sharks and rays that are
Interesting.
around,
Okay.
whereas the babies are probably eating pancakes
Okay.
predominantly.
Okay.
So we do see that change in age.
Uh-huh.
But what's amazing from the tagging is that we've learned that these animals can travel 3,000 miles in a year.
Wow. All right, so that leads me to two questions. One is, are they here year round? Because, Southern California is pretty mild. We have a pretty mild climate year round. So are they hanging out here like off this beach right here? Are they here year round, or is it seasonal? Or
So it used to be seasonal. In
Okay.
fact, back prior to 2015, before we had that strong El Nino, sharks would leave in the winter. The
Wow.
babies in particular, they would all migrate south
Really?
to Baja.
Okay.
And then after that, our waters have been getting progressively warmer in the winter. And we think as the sharks get bigger, they become more temperature tolerant. They can tolerate cooler waters. So the babies are still more migratory. They don't like water temperatures cooler than 60 degrees. And I'm with them on that, right? But the bigger ones, because they have a bigger body mass, can tolerate cooler temperatures. So they're staying all winter long.
Okay, interesting. All right, so you used a word that I'm very interested in, and that was migration. So in the marine mammalogy world, we use the strict definition of migration, which is going on a yearly, annual basis from a feeding ground to a breeding ground. But I don't really hear that from you. You're saying they might go to Hawaii for 5, 6, 7 years and then come back, but you still called it migration. So why is that considered migration?
Yeah, so we consider any mass movement where the animals are moving, regardless of the period of time, to be a migration away from an core area that they were using.
Okay.
So for example, if they're using this nursery day in, day out for months, and then they make a long range migration all the way down to Baja, say to Scammons Lagoon,
Uh-huh.
and then turn around and come all the way back, we consider that a seasonal migration.
Okay, interesting.
So I think it's definitions.
Yeah,
it's how we
sounds
define
like a
those
little bit of a
things.
definition thing. Yeah. Okay. So what else can you tell us about the technology? Don't you use like underwater AUVs too?
We do.
What's up with that?
So the AUVs are really cool. They help us map the environmental conditions at these beaches.
Okay.
So it kind of looks like a torpedo, and we can run that back and forth along the beach. It moves up and down through the water column, and it allows us to create 3D habitat maps.
Okay.
Temperature, chlorophyll, turbidity, and then we can ask why are the sharks using just this area and not these other areas?
Okay.
So it's been a very powerful, expensive tool that's helped us better understand what the sharks are doing and how they use this habitat.
But don't you have some that follow sharks too?
We do. We developed shark tracking robots, which
Okay.
is really cool.
Wow.
And the thing is, it works really well for leopard sharks, but
Oh.
white sharks can get really fast, and they can swim faster than the robot can catch up.
Really?
Absolutely.
Well, how fast can white sharks swim?
They can swim pretty fast. Enough fast.
Can they swim faster than Michael Phelps? That's
Oh,
my question.
Michael Phelps is going to get caught.
Okay.
Yes, they can swim fast enough to launch themselves 12 feet in the air.
Wow, that's amazing.
But I think it's time for some questions.
All right. So we're going to switch to Leo right now. He has a bunch of questions that he's going to ask Dr. Lowe about.
So, can you tell me a little bit about your research or any current projects that you're working on?
Yeah, so the research that we're doing right now, Leo, is really trying to figure out why sharks pick a particular beach.
Mm-hmm.
So what makes this beach special? And special for years, right? And we know new sharks are coming in and sharks are hanging out here and then they're leaving and they're going to some other aggregation sites. So right now we think a lot of it has to do with food and water temperature. So we're comparing places like this, where we have a big aggregation, where places that look similar but have no sharks.
Okay, and what kind of do you use like any systems or AI to help you in your research?
So we use AI for all the video that we get. Remember, so we're flying the drone, we get all this drone footage, and we can use the AI to count things like how many sharks do we see, how many people, how close are they getting to people. So we can use that to measure those things very fast. In addition, we get underwater video of the sharks, right? So we can see features on the sharks, and we're building libraries to help identify individuals. In fact, we have video cameras that we put on the seafloor that are taking pictures all the time, and the sharks take selfies. And we can use those selfies to identify individuals using AI.
And how often do you have to go out and retrieve these videos, or do they automatically upload to the system?
I wish they did. In fact, we got to work on that technology. Maybe one of you can help. So right now we're just using GoPros. So they're down for about 2 hours, as long as a GoPro lasts, and then we pull them back up.
Oh, okay. And is there a specific migration pattern? Do they go up and down the coast or out into the Pacific?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've been able to better answer that over the last few years of all our tagging. So using the acoustic and satellite transmitters, we found that the babies tend to hug the coast. So they do migrate up and down along the coast, whether they're going between aggregation sites or going down to Baja to warm up. And then they'll cover the coast coming back. But by the time they're 6 years old, they start investigating the offshore islands. In fact, by the time they're 6 years old, we've had a shark go all the way to Hawaii and detected in Hawaii.
Wow.
Now that's what the adults do. We know from our satellite tagging that the adults go out to the middle of the Pacific, halfway between California and Hawaii. They'll spend 9 months to a year and a half out there before coming back to the California coast.
It's quite a
big
journey.
migration.
Yeah. Kylie, do we have any questions coming through the chat?
Yeah, since we kind of have an older group of high school kids here, I know that something that kind of comes up a lot when you're in high school and you're starting to think about what's the next step. How does one get to do what it is that you do, Chris?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I would say there are a lot of different options, right? So I took the biology track. So I was interested in marine biology, and I'm interested in more than sharks, even marine mammals. They're kind of cool, right? So I took the biology track. And to be a biologist these days, a marine biologist, you got to have math, chemistry, physics, all those things, because they're all critical in biology. But not everybody has to be a biologist to be interested in study sharks. For example, I collaborate with engineers. I collaborate with computer scientists. All the new technology we get gathers huge amounts of data. I collaborate with mathematicians who help us interpret all those patterns of behavior from the massive data sets. I collaborate with artists and filmmakers, even journalists, right, Ava? Not the camera. Yeah, good. So there are lots of opportunities if you're interested in sharks, and you don't have to be a biologist. So we love collaborating with all these different groups.
Awesome. Sounds like sharks are for everybody. Another question that I think we hear about sharks, especially great white sharks, popularized in the media, and they're kind of they get a kind of a bad rap. So is it safe to swim in the water because of all the sharks? As conservation increases the number, should we be more concerned about being attacked?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, 30, 40 years ago, there were very few white sharks around because they had been overfished. So, but their protections went in place in California in the mid 90s. And since then, their populations have rebounded better than anybody could imagine. Same for marine mammals, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, with more and more sharks around the coast, that was a question we were asking 10 years ago. Is it safe for people to be in the water at these aggregation sites in and amongst these sharks? And one of the things our data has shown, particularly our drone footage has shown, is that white sharks are swimming underneath swimmers and surfers pretty much every day. As I'm talking to you, a juvenile white shark is swimming underneath a swimmer and surfer, and they don't even know that shark is there, and people aren't being bitten. So what this is clearly showing us scientifically is that just because you're in the water with a white shark, it's not going to bite you. In fact, one of the things that we're learning is that those sharks might even be learning how to identify people and then not make mistakes in the future. So right now, I would say we get in the water here all the time. We dive in this water around sharks, and the visibility is horrible. We know the sharks are nearby us. We never see them. So we know they're out there, but they don't bother us. So it's not telling people to be cavalier, right? So stay together, stay in a group. Your chances of being bitten go way down or becoming a mistake. And if you do get hurt, there's somebody there to help you.
Hey, I'd like to ask a question of Dr. Lowe, and that is, that dawn and dusk thing. You always hear, don't swim at dawn and dusk, don't swim at dawn and dusk. Is there really any data that show that dawn and dusk are the times that white sharks or any kind of sharks, really tiger sharks in Hawaii, are more active, or is that, an old wives' tale?
So there is good scientific data to show they are more active at dawn and dusk, but that doesn't mean your chances of being bitten are higher at dawn and dusk. So that's when they're feeding. In fact, these young white sharks, that's when they're the most active at dawn and dusk, and they're near the bottom.
Okay.
So, but where are people? We're at the surface.
Right.
At the beach, we're flotsam. We're just floating objects out there that don't even know the sharks are there. So I think the coolest thing that we're learning is that we are in and amongst the sharks all the time. We're able to share these habitats without affecting each other. And the sharks seem to be doing well, growing fast, plenty of food, and they're not bothering us because we're not bothering them.
All right, we have another question here. How many sharks live in this nursery? And then how many nurseries are there along the coast of California?
That's a great question. So in the early days of this research, we only knew of one nursery site at a time. What I can tell you is we're seeing more nurseries. They're increasing in number and they're getting bigger. The most sharks we've ever seen at a nursery site on the exact same day was 40 white sharks, between 5 feet long and 9 feet long, just cruising around just outside the wave break. So that's at the peak of the season. That's July and August, which is the peak of nursery season. So we know that these nurseries are getting more busy. They're becoming year round. And these sharks are using these beaches because they're very productive. There's plenty of food, it's safe, and the water's warm, so they grow fast.
All right. We have a question from Cash. They want to know what is the approximate depth of the water that you're in right now? And I guess that's kind of a good question. What is the depth of the water that these juvenile sharks hang out in?
So right now we're in about 35 feet of water. So it's fairly shallow. When we get in close to the beach, I've seen these sharks in 3 feet of water, literally 50 feet or 25 feet off the shoreline. So when it's really calm, they'll come in close. A lot of times they're a couple hundred yards off the beach, just outside the wave break, and usually water less than 30 feet deep.
So that's exactly where we're all surfing and recreating and swimming around. Good to know.
Exactly.
All right. And we spoke about white shark mating. How I think a couple people are confused. How can you tell the difference between male and female sharks?
Yes. So male sharks have what we call claspers, these two projections that come off of the pelvic fins, and those kind of act like a penis, not functionally a penis, but they act like that. Females do not. So their pelvic fins are flat and smooth. There's no projections.
Okay. And then speaking of mating, how many babies can a shark have at once?
Ooh, so it depends on the species. Some species like sand tiger sharks have a forked uterus, so they have 2 uteri, and they can give birth to 1 embryo per uterus because the biggest one eats all the siblings before they're born. But then we have things like whale sharks that can produce 300 babies at a time. So very big difference.
Can we back up there, Chris? Did you just say that sand tiger sharks have in utero cannibalism?
Absolutely. So
I feel like we should expand on that one.
Exactly. So it's very cool. So they start off like a chicken, you know, they're big yolk, and they develop from that. The yolk's gone when they're about this big, but they're born about this big. So the way they continue to get nutrition is the moms will continue to produce eggs that come into the uterus, and the embryos will eat them. Pretty soon she stops doing that, and then the biggest embryo, the one growing the fastest, will actually start to eat its siblings until there's only one per uterus. So a female will only give birth to 1 to 2 babies at a time.
That is the most metal thing I've heard maybe all week. All right. We have to go to a different question now, but that's crazy. Do you see a larger population of males, or larger proportion of males versus females in the white shark population off of the California coast?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So for most species of sharks, many of them segregate. Males and females go to different places at different times of year. Probably a lot of it has to do with the mating thing, males biting. But one of the things that we notice here in terms of the pups is that it tends to be about 3 to 1 females to male. So
Interesting.
it's just like our marine biology field, right?
Right. Yeah.
So it's really interesting that we find predominantly females here, and at other locations they find predominantly males. So even for young sharks, that's kind of an interesting thing
Really
to see
interesting. Yeah.
for even young ones.
Right.
Okay. Another question coming in from YouTube. We want to know, is there a variation in the size of Atlantic white sharks versus Pacific white sharks?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So in terms of adults, we're not really sure. Here in the Pacific, we see some very large ones. I think the biggest one that's been cited is at least 20 feet. And these haven't had a tape measure put to them. That's estimated from video. And in the Atlantic, you know, I would say the average shark that they see typically are, you know, in the 13 to 15, 16 foot range. But the largest record white shark ever caught was off Cuba. And I do believe that was measured at 23 feet long. So again, it's hard to say there are differences between regions in terms of size. Babies are about the same size between regions. They're born at about 4.5 feet long. And a female will give birth from anywhere to 2 to 15 babies at a time.
Okay. Speaking of a 23-foot long white shark, can you give us an example of something that is 23 feet long that we might have seen in the world, so that we can kind of have a visual reference of how big that would be?
Sure. So our partner Dan over there is filming us. This is a 17-foot whaler. So imagine adding another 5 feet, and that shark's probably wider than this boat.
Okay, that is insane.
That's a
All
big
right,
shark.
we are almost out of time. We will just get to a couple more questions here. Let's see. In terms of tagging the sharks, is there any sort of like risk to you, Chris, and to your researchers when you guys are tagging?
Yeah, absolutely. So anytime you're working with live animals, there's always risk, right? And our goal is to make sure the animals are safe and we're safe. So we do a lot of training. My students spend a lot of time training how to do this safely and properly. Even operating the boats or diving, huge amount of time and effort goes into training to do all those things safely. And of course, when you've got a live shark by the side of the boat and you're trying to do surgery on it, the key is to do that quickly and safely. So, you know, obviously there are people holding various parts of the shark to make sure the shark is stable. The great thing is they go into this tonic immobility, which makes it much easier for us. But even very large sharks can be upheld and managed safely as long as people trained and know what they're doing.
Okay. Very last question, just because I like to stir the pot. White sharks are one of the world's most formidable predators. Do they have any predators, Chris?
Yes, they do. Dr. G.
Yeah, so white shark, the really the only predator they have is the orca. So you know, it's a predator-prey relationship. What can I say? Marine mammals rule. I don't know.
Oh my gosh, she loves making that point. So yes, orca, the only known animal that can take out an adult white shark. How do they do it?
Well, orca hunt in packs, so they have cooperative feeding and they communicate with each other. So they cooperate, they communicate, they can surround a solitary white shark, because they are solitary animals, and they can take it down.
Yeah. So yeah, there you have it. Mammals rule again. But when they're small, an adult white shark can take out an orca if you can separate them from who?
Yeah, fair enough.
From mom or
From
grandma.
mom, yep.
They rule the
Mom
roost.
rules the roost. Yep.
Yep.
Fair enough.
Okay, I think we are just about out of time on questions. However, just because we're talking about marine mammals, Gwen, I believe you have a little something to plug about marine mammals.
Yes, I do. So if you enjoyed this live stream, you should definitely join us next March when we go to San Ignacio Lagoon in order to do a live stream and study the gray whales that are the moms are giving birth and they're mating down in San Ignacio. And we'll be there in March, and it is a spectacular time because there's whales everywhere doing everything you can imagine, including swimming under the boat and breaching and spy hopping and doing lots of stuff. So please join us next March for that.
So before we sign off, we want to apologize. The reason we know there are sharks here, we're detecting sharks here, but there's a horrible red tide in right now, making the water incredibly murky. So it has been very difficult to spot them from our drone. So while it was our goal to get you to see us tagging a shark, Mother Nature had another plan. So join us again some other time. Hopefully when we're out looking for gray whales, or maybe when we're off on some other adventure.
All right. Thank you so much, Chris and Gwen. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. Be on the lookout for future live streams. Anyone who joined today will be added to our list. So you guys will receive information about our live stream in March on the gray whales and all of the other streams that we will do beyond this. Thank you all for joining. Any questions that we didn't get to in the chat, I'll send those over to Dr. Lowe and we'll have him answer them for you. Thanks for joining.